Hey, my friends, how are you feeling tonight? Tonight, we saddle up for a ride into the gloriously impractical world of medieval jousting, where men in metal pajamas tried to knock each other off horses with giant sticks, all in the name of honor, chivalry, and sometimes just impressing a bored noblewoman in the front row. The sun rises slowly over a muddy field somewhere in 13th century France. There's a soft mist curling up from the grass, and the distant clatter of armor echoing like a medieval drumroll. You stand in the middle of it all, blinking through your helmet slit, trying to remember whether your squire packed your left gauntlet or accidentally gave it to Sir Gerald again. He would do that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love hearing from all corners of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift your feet in the damp morning grass. It squelches underneath the iron soles of your sabatons, basically steel shoes, the crocs of the nightly world, but heavier and marginally less comfortable. Across the field, a few other knights are already wandering toward the paddock, helmets tucked under their arms, complaining about the draft in their chainmail pants. Classic Sir Reginald never wears his coif properly. This is the world of the medieval tournament, and more specifically the joust, a sport that somehow managed to be both dead serious and absolutely ridiculous. You're here to compete, of course, but also to be seen. A knight without a reputation is just a guy in a tin can with debt. Historians still argue whether the origins of jousting lie in Roman cavalry training or early Germanic tribal games involving a lot of yelling and bruised horses. But by the time you arrive on this chilly morning, jousting has evolved into something deeply codified, highly ceremonial, and strangely elegant in its own brutal way. The rules. Oh, they exist. You can't just jab willy-nilly. There are specific target zones, strict etiquette, and even penalty points for too much enthusiasm. Think of it as meme if the fighters wore formal wear and paused for poetic introductions. As you glance toward the wooden tilt barrier, the narrow divider where jousts actually take place, you spot last year's winner, Sir Baldwin, of somewhere you've never heard of, already warming up. His squire is brushing down his destrier, a hulking beast of a horse, named for some reason Petal. Petal has been trained to charge forward like a battering ram on espresso. You try not to think about that. What you do think about, though, is your own reputation. This tournament is sponsored by a local baron who reportedly hands out golden goblets and land parcels like their discount coupons. Plus, Lady Isabel might be watching from the stands again. Last time she gave you an encouraging nod, which in medieval courtship basically means you're practically married. The smell of roasted onions and horse dung mingles in the morning air as carts creak by bringing in banners, weapons, and several barrels of something suspiciously labeled ale with a question mark. Vendors shout over one another about cheese wheels, relics of questionable saints, and miracle ointments made with crocodile dung. Yes, that was a real thing. Apparently very exfoliating. You duck into the supply tent for a moment of quiet. Inside it smells of leather and old sweat. Your armor hangs on a wooden frame, each piece gleaming dully in the filtered light. Your squire, probably named something like Odo or Wymond, is already fussing with the greaves and pauldrons. He's 13, full of attitude, and very likely stronger than you. "Good morning, my lord," he says, struggling to lift your breastplate. "Did you sleep well?" You did not. Your cot was lumpy, your neighbor snored like a war trumpet, and your dreams were full of slow motion falling, which is, let's be honest, a very likely outcome today. As you begin gearing up, you can hear the opening fanfare. Trumpets blare, and a voice calls out the list of today's participants with so many titles and patronymics. It sounds like someone just spilled a Latin dictionary. The crowd murmurs with anticipation, a mix of nobility townsfolk and the occasional pickpocket hoping someone gets distracted by a lance to the face. And yet for all the pageantry, for all the danger, there's a rhythm here. A comfort even. You belong in this world of splinters and silk. You're not here just to survive. You're here to ride, to fight, to prove that your training and courage mean something. That the stories sung about you might last a few decades longer than your teeth. Still, there's a sobering thought behind all this bravado. Jousting may be noble, but it's far from safe. A single misjudged angle, a cracked helmet, or an overly enthusiastic horse, and you're not just losing the round, you're getting a one-way ticket to medieval dentistry, which, spoiler alert, is just pull it and pray. Some scholars still debate whether these early tournaments were actually intended to be training for real warfare, or simply staged diversions for the idle elite. Either way, they were undeniably brutal and frequently injurious. Yet they persisted generation after generation because knights needed practice, nobles needed spectacle, and, let's face it, people have always loved watching two armored weirdos crash into each other at full speed. You step out of the tent fully dressed, your armor clinking like a particularly dramatic wind chime. A few pages scatter ahead of you, and someone offers you a goblet of watered-down wine. You take a sip. It tastes like regret and iron, which is frankly appropriate. The other knights nod in your direction. There's a grim camaraderie in the air. You're all about to be turned into mobile punching bags in front of hundreds of spectators. But you're also part of something bigger, a tradition, a dance, a violent opera in slow motion. You take a breath, square your shoulders, and make your way toward the paddock. The sun's higher now, cutting through the mist and gleaming off your armor in all the right ways. You try to look taller, confident, less likely to fall off. And as you mount your horse for the first ride of the day, the only thought, louder than the crowd, is a simple one. Please don't faceplant in front of Lady Isabel again. You wake up in the cold gray of dawn, barely warmed by the thin linen undershirt clinging to your chest, and you already regret your life choices. The first thing on your schedule as a knight today isn't glory or fame, it's oatmeal. Lumpy, lukewarm oatmeal served in a wooden bowl stirred with what may or may not be a repurposed tent peg. You eat it slowly, trying to ignore the sound of your neighbor dry heaving behind the latrine tent. He probably had the fish last night. You wisely avoided it. Being a knight, it turns out, is about 80% patience, 15% chafing, and 5% high-stakes, horse-based collision. You scrape your bowl clean with your finger resisting the urge to throw it at a goose, wandering a little too confidently near your bedroll. You're already dressed in your base layers, quilted gambazon hose, a woolen codpiece that's seen better centuries, and now it's time to prepare for the ritual that is suiting up. Your squire Odo drags in a small wooden crate like he's smuggling treasure. Inside your armor, carefully oiled, slightly dented, and smelling like wet dog left in a forge. You start with the mail chausses for your legs. One leg in, two legs in. You hop like a medieval flamingo while Odo lasses you up with the speed and attitude of someone who has been yelled at by knights since he was 6. To be fair, he has. "Hold still, my lord," he mutters. "You're squirming." "I'm not squirming. I'm adjusting." "You're adjusting like a panicked goose." You don't argue. The armor layers go on piece by piece, starting with the arming doublet. Then the breastplate, which Odo buckles with extra flair, tight enough that you can't quite inhale fully. The vambrusses and gauntlets follow, and finally the helmet, conical visor slitted and designed to block your peripheral vision just enough to be incredibly inconvenient. You test a few moves. Kneel, stretch, raise your arms. You immediately regret stretching. Something pinches behind your left knee, and your right shoulder sounds like someone stepping on a bag of walnuts. Ah, youth. It's easy to romanticize this whole process, but historians still argue whether the average knight even suited up themselves at all. Some sources suggest they were perfectly capable. Others point to written accounts of full-grown men crying while trying to untangle their chainmail shirts. You believe both, frankly, especially the crying part. Once you're armored up, it's time for the mental part of the morning routine. You sit for a moment trying to remember the name of your horse. It's probably Bramble, or Thunder, or Sir Kixalot III, and go over the knight's oath in your head. No, not the one about loyalty and courage. The other one, don't die in a humiliating fashion. It's not officially written down, but every knight knows it by heart. Then come the inspections. A page walks through camp with a checklist and a measuring stick verifying that your lance meets length and weight requirements. A too long lance disqualified. A too sharp one fined. A sneaky dagger hidden in your boot officially frowned upon, though Sir Edgar once got away with it by claiming it was for cheese. You take a brief moment for personal reflection, which for most knights just means staring at a tree and thinking about their debts. Tournaments aren't free. You've paid to enter, bribed the gatekeeper, and rented a stall for your horse. All this for a shot at glory, or at least to make enough coin to fix the hole in your tent. Nearby, someone recites a prayer. Not loudly, not ostentatiously, just a quiet chant for safety. You join in with your own silent version. Not because you're especially pious, but because there's something comforting about the ritual. And honestly, if divine intervention is going to save you from a full-speed lance to the sternum, now's the time. Quirky as it may seem, part of the nightly morning routine includes oiling the armor, not just for shine, but to prevent rust and allow a bit more mobility. Some knights even add herbs to their oils, rosemary, thyme, or wild garlic, which they believe brings luck or at least masks the smell of yesterday's anxiety sweat. You pause to adjust your groin plate. Again, Oda gives you a look. Yes, you're fidgeting. Yes, it's uncomfortable. No, there's no dignified way to say, "This thing keeps pinching me in unspeakable places." He mutters, "You should have sprung for the padded version." You give him a look that says, "I'll pad you into a barrel and roll you into the moat, but gently, with love." Once the armor is set, your final step is to apply your colors. Your surcoat, a long sleeveless garment worn over your armor, is blue and gold with a vaguely terrifying lion that you drew yourself. It looks less fierce beast and more angry sheepdog, but it's symbolic of what that's between you and your tailor. You don your helm finally. The world narrows. The edges of your vision close in. The sounds dull slightly. You're now officially in night mode. The transformation from sweaty human to clanking war god is complete. Just ignore the itch on your nose you can no longer reach. And then there's a moment, just a beat of quiet, where you feel the weight of the armor, the distant hum of the crowd, gathering the smell of horse sweat and wet grass, and you realize this is the calmest you'll feel today. You savor it. The stillness before the hoofbeats, before the cheering, before the impact. The real morning routine of a jousting night isn't glorious. It's methodical, uncomfortable, a little absurd. But through it all, there's a strange sort of dignity in the repetition, in trusting your squire, your armor, and your overfed horse to carry you through another day of potential blunt force trauma. Because when you're a knight, your morning prep doesn't end with breakfast. It ends when the trumpet sounds, your visor drops, and you realize the man charging at you is twice your size and possibly holding a personal grudge. The ground shifts underneath you in a way that only happens when you're trying to mount a warhorse in full armor and praying no one's watching. You've made it through breakfast prayers, the 10-minute argument about which boot belongs to whom, and now comes the truly treacherous part of your morning climbing onto a horse that costs more than your family estate and has the mood swings of a greased-up catapult. Your steed today is named Ferryman, which feels ominous. He's 17 hands high, with a mane like tangled rope and the haunted eyes of a veteran who's seen too many tournaments. As you stand on the little mounting stool. Yes, that's right, a stool, you realize just how tall he is from this new regrettable perspective. Ferryman lets out a snort that could knock over a tent and flicks his tail in your general direction. You get the sense he's judging your posture. Mounting a horse in full armor is not elegant. It's not swift. It is, however, very loud. Every movement you make is accompanied by a clunk, a rattle, or a disheartening metallic squeal. Your squire steadies Ferryman's bridle while you swing one leg up and over, which would be easier if your joints didn't feel like cold porridge. For a moment you're perched halfway up, tilting ominously thighs, trembling armor creaking like an old ship about to capsize. Then somehow you're up, in the saddle. Wobbling a bit, but technically upright. Small victories, right? You adjust your seat, trying not to think about what would happen if you fell off now. In this armor, you'd bounce twice and get stuck upside down like a very expensive turtle. Historians still argue whether jousting armor was actually that restrictive. Some say knights had a surprising range of motion. Others suggest that once mounted they essentially became top-heavy human cannonballs with very poor steering. Ferryman takes a few steps forward just to test your balance. You grip the reins, which have been oiled to the point of slipperiness, and offer a soothing word. He ignores it. A goose honks nearby. Ferryman flinches. You nearly lose your helmet to physics. It's going great so far. As you trot toward the tilt yard, the noise of the crowd swells. Children cheer. Vendors holler about roasted chestnuts and novelty, Saint bones, and somewhere in the distance a lute player is really committing to a melody that sounds suspiciously like Greensleeves. You try to look confident, regal, at least competent. Other knights are mounting up around you, some with practiced grace, others with the distinct clatter of failure. One poor soul has managed to tangle his surcoat in his saddle straps and is now yelling at his horse as though that will fix anything. Another knight, Sir Hugh, has already lost a spur and is trying to duct tape it back on using some kind of sticky tree sap. You make a mental note not to ride behind him. As you approach the lineup area near the list, The long wooden barrier that divides the jousting field, you feel your heartbeat start to sync with the soft rhythm of hoofbeats. There's a calm there, almost meditative right before the violence. You glance over and spot your opponent for the round, Sir Emmerich, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, and already sweating through his armpits. You remember him from last year. He hit someone so hard the lance broke in 5 places and the horse reared into a cabbage cart. You nod at him. He nods back. There's a code among jousters. You don't have to like each other, but you respect the absurdity you've both willingly agreed to. Now the pre-joust checks begin. A marshal, usually a retired knight with one eye, and a booming voice strides down the line. With a clipboard, a parchment on a stick, and inspects each rider. He checks your saddle, straps, your armor's fastenings, and the state of your lance. He gives Ferryman a pat on the neck and a knowing look. Ferryman sighs like he's done with everyone's nonsense. You test your grip on the lance, feeling its weight. It's over 10 feet long, tipped with a blunted coronel, designed to splinter on impact rather than pierce. Still, no one's under the illusion that this is safe. It's just less lethal. Quirky aside, some knights used to decorate their lances with ribbons or love tokens from admirers. You've got one tied near the grip, a blue strip of fabric from Lady Isabel's scarf. Hopefully, it's lucky. Hopefully, it's not cursed. It's hard to tell with noblewomen. The tilt barrier stretches ahead, a narrow wooden wall that keeps the horses from slamming into each other mid-charge. It's a good idea, though, not foolproof. Sometimes the horses still veer. Sometimes knights jump it, which is either brave or colossally dumb, depending on whether they land face first. You take a breath. Adjust your seat again. Your armor pinches in new and exciting places. The marshal raises a flag. Ferryman stomps impatiently. You grip the reins, flex your fingers around the lance, and prepare for the charge that's about to redefine your understanding of velocity and regret. This is it. The moment all that training, all those bruises, all the surprisingly tender poetry carved into your shield come down to. In a few seconds, you'll be galloping straight at another human in 80 pounds of steel while trying not to blink, flinch, or fall off like a sack of angry potatoes. The flag drops, and Ferryman surges forward. You lean in, lance down, shield high. The wind hits your face through the visor slit, and the world narrows to a straight line, a blur of dirt and spectators and armored fury. You hear the crowd's roar rise, distant and muffled like waves crashing against a stone wall. And just before impact, you think, I hope Lady Isabel is watching. Crack. It's not so much a sound as it is a feeling, an entire wave of splintering wood and seismic force slamming through your lance, your shield, your soul. You don't see it coming, not really. 1 second, you're charging forward in a straight line, doing your best impression of a fast-moving cathedral gargoyle. The next, your opponent's lance makes enthusiastic contact with the center of your chest. You feel it echo in your ribs, in your teeth, maybe even in your past lives. Your own lance finds its target too, you hope. It's hard to tell because you're suddenly far more concerned with staying in the saddle than keeping score. Ferryman, bless him, keeps galloping for a few feet before slowing to a snorting side-eyed halt. You manage to stay upright, mostly due to luck and the slight forward lean you had from instinctive terror. The crowd roars, but it's a blurry noise through your helmet. You're busy recalibrating your spine. There's a ringing in your ears. Your fingers have gone slightly numb, and something wet is trickling down the back of your neck. Is it sweat? Is it regret? You don't ask. You turn ferryman around as gracefully as a man in a tin can manage and trot back to your starting position. Odo meets you with wide eyes and the look of someone who is actively rethinking his career path. Still alive, my lord? You grunt. That's good. He nods. The other fellow's on the ground, bit sideways. Ah, a minor victory. You peer down the field. Sure enough, Sir Emeric is sitting in the dirt, helmet off, looking dazed but largely intact. One of his squires is holding up a finger and asking how many apples he sees. It's a good sign. 2 apples is about average. The marshal strides to the center of the list and raises his arms. The crowd quiets slightly well, except for the drunk in the back, still yelling. Hit him again. Someone throws a chicken leg. No one reacts. Point to sir. The marshal pauses, checking the banner on your shield. Sir Hugh again for breaking his lance and unseating his opponent. A cheer goes up. It's not a deafening roar, but it's appreciative. You offer a brief salute with your shattered lance and try not to topple over from the effort. Now begins the ritual known as the post-pass evaluation. You return to your corner of the field where Odo helps you dismount. This takes approximately 6 minutes, 3 grunts, 1 kicked stirrup, and a brief panic when your right foot gets stuck. Once you're back on the ground, your body informs you that it has been deeply offended by recent events. You strip off your helmet. The breeze against your face is like a gift from the heavens. Somewhere, someone hands you a cup of watered wine. You down it like it's the elixir of eternal life. How'd I do, you ask? Odo raises an eyebrow. You screamed. I yelled. It was high-pitched. Battle cry. You glare at him, but not too hard. You need him to help you walk. While you recover, the scribes update the scoring boards, large painted panels, listing each knight's name, house, colors, and number of passes completed without becoming a lawn ornament. There's always a bit of delay as they try to spell things phonetically. Sir de Winthrop becomes Sir de Wintrow. You've seen worse. Last year, Sir Geoffrey ended up listed as Sir Jeff. Your next pass isn't for another hour, which gives you time to stew in your own sweaty armor and ponder things like, why is my rib vibrating? And did I forget to update my will? Historically, jousting tournaments were all-day affairs. Multiple rounds, elimination brackets, and frequent delays while someone's helmet was hammered back into helmet shape. But despite the spectacle, the structure of scoring was surprisingly formal. Points were awarded for lance strikes to different areas, shield, torso, helmet, with unseating an opponent being the grand prize. Of course, unofficially, the highest honor was not wetting yourself during the charge. You used the break to re-wrap your fingers' blisters, forming already, and relace the ties under your arm. Odo re-oils a few spots on your breastplate. A traveling barber surgeon offers to leech your bruises, which you politely decline. Barely. Nearby, another joust kicks off. You watch as 2 younger knights go head-to-head, all bravado and bright plumes. They miss completely on the first pass, just 2 armored missiles whizzing past each other with a loud whoosh and 0 contact. The crowd groans. The second pass is better. 1 lance breaks, the other glances off a helmet, leaving a lovely smear of blue paint across the visor. You nod approvingly. It's important to encourage the youth. Your name is called again. Odo helps you remount. Ferryman makes a noise that might be laughter. You take your position at the start of the tilt square your shoulders and wait. Your new opponent is Sir Gilbert of East Haven. He's not especially tall, but he's quick, known for tilting at an angle that throws off your center of balance. You remind yourself to lower your lance earlier. Watch for the dip, and maybe don't lean so far forward this time unless you want to get launched like a particularly ambitious javelin. The flag lifts. You exhale slowly, and then charge. Again, the world becomes a blur. Dust kicks up. The air whistles past. Your arm trembles with the weight of the lance, but you keep it level. Your eyes lock onto that moment, just before impact, when everything is weightless, suspended, and you're still hoping this all ends in glory instead of dental realignment. And bam, another hit. This one glances off your shield, but it throws you sideways. You wobble, recover, somehow stay mounted. Your own lance connects with Sir Gilbert's breastplate, but doesn't shatter. A solid hit, but not a breaking one. The crowd claps, polite, but unimpressed. You ride out the run and slow to a halt, already counting the new bruises. Not every pass is dramatic. Some are near misses. Some are tactical dances, and some are just warm-ups for the chaos to come. You head back to your post, sip more wine, and wait to be called again, because this is just round one, and the day is still long. You lose track of how many passes you've done by mid-afternoon. At some point, the dirt of the tiltyard turns to powder under the relentless pounding of hooves, and your left arm becomes one giant cramp from hoisting that absurdly long lance again and again. You're sweating like a pig in a sauna. Your thighs are in open rebellion, and you've come dangerously close to throwing up twice. But hey, you're still in the tournament, and your horse hasn't thrown you into a beehive yet. Progress. Between matches, you rest in the canvas shade of the competitor's tent, surrounded by the sighs, snores, and groans of other knights in various states of unglory. Some peel off armor and collapse dramatically onto hay bales. One poor soul has a squire fanning his armpits while muttering something about divine retribution. You lie back, helmet off, and let the warm breeze comb through your hair like a lazy ghost. A bowl of stew materializes next to you, courtesy of a wandering kitchen boy who probably has no idea how much danger he's in carrying hot soup into a room full of cranky, bruised men in metal casings. You murmur your thanks and start shoveling it in with a wooden spoon that might once have doubled as a tent peg. Historically, jousting tournaments weren't just brutal, they were marathons. A single tourney could stretch over several days, with dozens of knights competing in elimination-style brackets. It wasn't just about who could hit the hardest, it was about stamina, nerve, and a stubborn refusal to admit your vision had doubled sometime after noon. You think of those who quit early and sigh, not out of judgment, but envy. Outside, the herald announces the next round. You can tell he's been yelling all day. His voice has the tonal quality of a rusted hinge. Sir you again, versus Sir Baudouin of Westmere. Odo ever the optimist claps you on the back. You can take him, my lord. He's got that weird leg twitch. Is that good for me, you ask? No idea, he shrugs. But it's weird. With some groaning, huffing, and assistance from at least one rope pulley, you get back into your armor. Your left shoulder clicks ominously. You consider asking the nearest priest for a preemptive funeral blessing. As you mount ferryman again, you try to remember Sir Baudouin's technique. He's known for favoring the left side leans in that direction, sometimes to a fault. A clever knight might feint that way, then swerve to the right last second, just enough to catch him off guard. You make a mental note and promptly forget it, because your visor fogs up from your own breath. The trumpet sounds. You position your lance. Ferryman dances beneath you, impatient but reliable. The flag lifts. Charge! The ground rattles beneath your horse's hooves. Every nerve in your body lights up. You adjust, slightly leaning into the rhythm. This time, the lance feels balanced. Your grip is strong, your aim straight. And just as you close the last dozen feet, you remember the feint. You shift your weight to the left just barely, and then swerve your lance slightly right. The tip catches Baudouin square on the shoulder. Crack! Baudouin jerks sideways and gloriously tips backward off his horse like a sack of noble potatoes. The crowd lets out a roar. Even Ferryman tosses his head like he's proud of you. You ride through, slow down, and turn just in time to see Baudouin sitting upright in the dirt, blinking like someone who's just remembered they left the oven on. His squire runs over with water and a long list of apologies. The marshal raises the flag again. Point to Sir Hugh again for unhorsing his opponent. Another wave of cheers. A few flowers get thrown. One of them hits your helmet and lodges in the visor slit. It's oddly charming. You dismount a little more gracefully this time and sit back on the nearest bench. Odo rushes over with fresh water and a rag soaked in vinegar. Nicely done, he says, dabbing your face. That puts you into the next bracket. How many are left, you ask, sipping. Just 6. You're in the semifinals now. You blink. Already. He grins. It's not a big tournament. The other 2 finalists are Sir Alaric and Sir Bertrand the Silent. You've heard of Bertrand? Not because he's good though he is, but because he genuinely never speaks. He communicates through hand signal shrugging and the occasional passive-aggressive eyebrow raise. Rumor has it he once jousted with a fever so high he thought his horse was a dragon. He still won. Sir Alaric, though, that's the real threat. He's tall, precise, and rides a charger that looks like it eats other horses for breakfast. His armor's black and gold, his surcoat always spotless. He has the irritating confidence of a man who's never been struck squarely in the groin. You try not to dwell on that yet. Instead, you rest. Eat a little more. Reapply a layer of wax to your gauntlets. And take a moment to appreciate the absurdity of it all. You're competing in what is essentially medieval NASCAR, except the cars are sentient and the crashes end in lawsuits written on parchment. You wonder how much of this was for training and how much was for show. Historians still argue whether tournaments were serious military drills or over-glorified public entertainment. Certainly the rules were real. The armor was heavy. The lances hurt. But when the prizes were things like land titles and gold and sometimes a date with a noblewoman who might or might not secretly be married to the local bishop, well, motivations got a bit fuzzy. You glance down the line and see Sir Bertrand sitting perfectly still on his horse hands, folded like he's meditating. It's disconcerting. Meanwhile, Sir Alaric is adjusting his gauntlets and having his horse's hooves polished. Seriously, polished. The sun begins to dip. The sky softens into that late afternoon haze where shadows lengthen and everything turns a little golden. The crowd is still raucous, but beginning to slow tired from the long day of cheering, drinking, and watching people get gently concussed. Your name is called again. You rise every joint, clicking like castanets. Ferryman waits steady as always. You pat his neck. Semifinals, old boy, you murmur, let's not explode. You mount, adjust, breathe. Your next tilt awaits. And this time, the stakes are just a bit higher. Sir Bertrand the Silent is staring at you. Well, maybe not staring exactly. His visors down his armor doesn't move, and from this distance he might actually be napping. But you feel his stare in that bone-deep way that tells you this man has unhorsed many opponents and probably never said oops while doing it. You've reached the semi-finals. This is the part of the day where the crowd starts picking favorites and placing bets, and the remaining knights all begin calculating how many bruises they can sustain before their internal organs file a formal complaint. Ferryman shifts beneath you. You whisper a few calming words and pat his mane. It's as much for you as it is for him. Odo gives your lance one final check, tightens your gauntlet straps, and backs away like a man who has seen far too much jousting in one lifetime. The trumpet sounds. You and Bertrand move to your starting marks. His horse is big gray and also terrifyingly still. The beast doesn't paw the ground or toss its head, just stands like a statue carved from war and bad intentions. You square your shield, lower your visor, and grip your lance. The crowd hushes. Dust hangs in the air like powdered suspense. The flag drops. Charge. It's all muscle memory now. The tilt rail blurs beside you. Your lance comes level. You aim not for the man, but for the shield just to the inside edge. A safe target. But Bertrand doesn't move, doesn't sway. He's so centered it's like he's made of gravity. At the last second, your tip glances off his shield and Bertrand's lance slams into your shoulder with the force of a small, determined moon. You don't fall, but it's close. You slide hard in the saddle toes, instinctively curling in the stirrups. Ferryman keeps going. Good lad. You bring him to a stop and try to shake the buzzing from your left arm. The marshal waves a flag. Point to Sir Bertrand for solid contact to the upper quadrant. Ugh, upper quadrant. That's the polite way of saying he almost launched your clavicle into the next county. You trot back to your end. Odo jogs over eyes scanning for broken bits. You all right? Define. All right, you mutter, flexing your fingers. You still have fingers. That's encouraging. Bertrand is already back in position. Still no movement, no showboating, no post-hit theatrics, just silence. It's unsettling. You ready your lance for pass two. This time you charge with more precision. You aim low, hoping to unbalance him. Bertrand counters by not even blinking, or at least that's how it feels. Your lance hits splinters slightly. His hits again, less force this time, but still a clean strike. The crowd murmurs. Points are even now. One final pass will decide who goes to the finals. You try to shake out the fatigue. Your shoulders sore, your thighs are trembling, and your ears are still ringing from that last hit. But this is it. One more run. Odo hands you a fresh lance and claps your leg. Channel your inner spite, he says. Is that a strategy? It's the strategy. You square off. Breathe. The sun is lower now, bleeding gold across the field. Your shadow stretches ahead of you like a lance of its own. Charge. You feel every beat of Ferryman's hooves, every clank of armor. You focus. Time slows. You see Bertrand raise his lance a touch too early. He's opening up his left side. You tilt just a hair to the right, adjust your angle, and thrust your lance into that gap. Crack. Wood shatters. Bertrand rocks backward, wavers. For a moment he's off balance. Not off his horse, but visibly rocked. You ride through, turn, heart hammering. The marshal raises the flag. Point to Sir Hugh again for breaking his lance and unbalancing the opponent. A cheer goes up, not just polite, enthusiastic. A few kids wave pennants. One woman throws a bouquet that narrowly misses your head and smacks Odo in the face. He catches it anyway. That's why he's the best. Bertrand salutes. No grudge, no theatrics. Just a silent nod before he turns and rides off. You dismount, legs like pudding. Odo throws an arm around you and half drags you to the tent. You did it, he grins. Finals, baby. You groan in reply and sip something that's probably wine and maybe just a little medicinal vinegar. Your bones are tired in a way that makes you wonder if you were born in armor. You sit in silence for a while, watching the tilt as squires rake the field, reset the barriers, and clear debris, splintered lances mostly, and one lost glove. While you're recovering, let's take a little detour. You deserve it. See, for all its smashing and clashing, jousting wasn't always so straightforward. There's still debate among historians about whether these late medieval tournaments were more sport or spectacle. Early jousts were far messier, often part of chaotic melee events where multiple knights charged around, trying not to accidentally or intentionally decapitate each other. Over time, the sport evolved, became more codified, more symbolic. By the 14th and 15th centuries, it resembled the structured tilt you're now suffering through. By then, the sport had its own league of legends. Knights who became famous not for winning wars, but for unseating 6 men in a single afternoon, or having their armor painted gold while riding an albino horse named Justice. One particularly quirky fact: some knights were obsessed with romantic symbolism. They'd wear favors, ribbons, veils, even a sock from a lady they admired, supposedly to inspire their performance. In one tournament, a French knight rode with a lady's garter tied around his helmet spike. Historians still argue whether that was a declaration of love or just incredibly bad decision-making. Back in the present, the field is clear. You hear the trumpet again. Odo helps you stand. Final round's next, he says, against Sir Alaric. Ah, yes, that guy. You watch as Sir Alaric rides to his mark. His black and gold armor gleams. His horse looks offended by the existence of lesser creatures. The crowd goes quiet, not out of respect, but because they're anticipating someone's spectacular defeat. Probably yours. You inhale. Exhale. Remind yourself you've made it this far. That you're not here just to win, but to survive long enough to bathe. You mount Ferryman, who lets out a small sigh as if to say, "Here we go again." Your visor lowers. Your grip tightens. The final match awaits. The final match is set, and the crowd's anticipation thickens like stew left to simmer too long. Sir Alaric stands across from you, his armor gleaming under the fading sunlight, every inch the picture of aristocratic menace. His black and gold surcoat flaps slightly in the breeze, and his horse paws the ground impatiently, as if bored with this inevitable confrontation. You try not to think about how many lances he shattered this very day, or how many opponents he sent sprawling like ragdolls. You settle into the saddle of Ferryman, your trusty warhorse, who's been remarkably patient through all this chaos. You both know what's coming. There's no room for hesitation now. The tilt yard feels alive, pulsing with the weight of expectation. The scent of hay, sweat, and leather fills the air, a strangely comforting blend amid all the tension. Your fingers tighten around your lance's shaft. Your helmet's visor clicks shut, muffling the world into a dull, distant roar. You remind yourself that jousting, despite the drama, is a game of measured precision, not reckless brawling. Yet every joust is different. Sometimes your opponent is courteous, sometimes a showman, and sometimes, well, a downright menace. Sir Alaric gives a subtle nod, and the trumpeter sounds the charge. You surge forward, the thunder of hooves drowning out all thoughts. But one, stay balanced, keep your lance steady, aim true. The world narrows down to the narrow rail, the tilt fence, and the massive figure approaching at terrifying speed. Your lance meets his shield with a shattering crack, the force so immense it nearly rattles your teeth. Ferryman's muscles strain, matching the sheer power on the other side. But Alaric's lance slams into your left shoulder with equal force. You gasp, but stay upright, fighting the sudden sharp pain. The crowd erupts in cheers and the herald raises the flag point to Sir Alaric for the first pass. You glance over, catching Alaric's intense gaze through his visor. His confidence is as unyielding as the steel covering him. You circle back, heart pounding. Odo meets you with a rag and a grunt. "You okay?" he asks. "Survived, so far. 2 passes remain, and you can feel your energy draining like water from a cracked barrel." The midday sun has given way to a softer glow, the perfect light for a dramatic fall if you're not careful. During the break, you overhear some whispers about Alaric's secret weapon, a custom lance reinforced with a rare, dense wood from the Black Forest. Historians still argue whether such materials made a real difference or were just fanciful bragging rights, but you're not keen to find out firsthand. Your second pass starts. You charge with all the grit you can muster, aiming for the gap beneath his shield, an opening you spotted earlier. Alaric anticipates your move, pivoting just so, and your lance glances off harmlessly while his spear crashes again into your shoulder. The sting spreads quickly. You wince, but keep your grip. The herald calls the point for Alaric again. Desperation stirs in you. This isn't just about glory anymore. It's about pride. You adjust your lance's angle on the third and final run, hoping for a clean hit. The horses thunder forward. Your lance strikes true, shattering on impact. Alaric, caught slightly off guard, wobbles, but maintains his seat. The crowd holds its breath. The marshal raises the flag point to Sir you again. Cheers rise, a surge of hope and relief. But Alaric's earlier points mean you're still behind. The two of you trot back, bodies aching and breaths heavy. The final scores are tallied, and the herald announces Sir Alaric as the winner by a narrow margin. It's a defeat, yes, but not the humiliating kind. You both nod respectfully, acknowledging the battle fought fairly. As the crowd disperses and the sun sets, you reflect on the spectacle, a mix of danger, skill, and unexpected grace. And you can't help but smile a little, knowing that sometimes the most polite art in your world is the way knights fall face first with dignity. So you have your finely crafted lance, your gleaming and hopefully well-padded armor, and your warhorse, who is by now probably more experienced in these matters than some of the newer esquires. But you don't just grab your stick and immediately go try to knock Sir Reginald off his high horse. Oh no, that would be far too efficient. Before the first splinter of wood flies, before the first satisfying thwack echoes across the lists, there's an entire symphony of ritual and display to unfold. This is the pageantry before the pounding, the elaborate warm-up act designed to build anticipation, display wealth and status, and perhaps allow everyone one last chance to chicken out. Well, maybe not chicken out, but at least one last chance to look incredibly impressive while standing still. Imagine the scene. The tournament grounds are already humming. The stands are packed with spectators from the highest nobility in their shaded boxes draped with rich tapestries to the common folk, jostling for a view from wherever they can find purchase. Minstrels are playing, vendors are hawking their wares, perhaps a genuine splinter from a famous knight's last victorious lance, only slightly used, and the air is thick with a mixture of excitement and the smell of nervous horse. This isn't just a sporting event. It's a social one, a political one, and a theatrical one, all rolled into one magnificent, if slightly muddy package. One of the first grand events is often the vespers of the tournament or the display of helms. The evening before the main event, the participating knights would hang their helms and shields, often surmounted by their distinctive crests, those flamboyant, three-dimensional sculptures like lions, swans, or even more fantastical beasts in a designated place, perhaps a cloister or a great hall. This allowed everyone, especially the ladies and the heralds, to inspect the competitors. It was a chance to identify who was participating, to admire or critique their heraldry, and for the heralds to ensure that everyone present was, in fact, of noble birth and entitled to bear arms. You wouldn't want some upstart merchant's son with a fancy helmet trying to sneak in, would you? The horror historians still argue whether these displays were more about formal verification of lineage or about the sheer peacocking opportunity afforded to the knights. It's likely a healthy dose of both. Then comes the procession. On the morning of the joust, you and your fellow competitors wouldn't just amble onto the field. There would be a grand parade, a cavalcade of color and sound. Each knight accompanied by his squires, pages and men-at-arms, all decked out in his livery colors, would ride in procession to the lists. Banners bearing their coats of arms would flutter, trumpets would blare their specific fanfares, and the horses themselves would be caparisoned in rich fabrics, sometimes embroidered with pearls or gold thread. It was a statement. Look at me. I am Sir Cuthbert of Crimp on the Wold, and I have enough disposable income to dress my entire entourage in matching shades of puce and mustard yellow. It was also a chance for the ladies to get a good look at the contestants and perhaps to choose a champion to favor. Ah, the ladies. Their role in the pageantry was crucial. Often a queen of beauty or a lady of the tournament would be chosen to preside, to award prizes, and importantly to bestow her favor upon a knight. This favor might be a scarf, a sleeve, a glove, or some other token which the knight would then proudly attach to his helm or lance. This wasn't just a romantic gesture, it was a public declaration. The knight fought not just for himself, but in honor of his lady. It raised the stakes, added a layer of chivalric romance, and probably made for some very awkward conversations if the knight, wearing Lady Penelope's prized silk handkerchief, got unhorsed in a particularly undignified manner. Did you see Sir Geoffrey? He landed face first in the mud. So much for Penelope's champion. Before the jousting commenced, there was often a formal presentation of the knights to the presiding noble or the judges. Each knight might ride forward, lower his lance in salute, and perhaps announce his name and lineage, or have a herald do it for him in a booming voice. This was part of the chevauchée, or formal entry. It was all very solemn and impressive, a bit like an Olympic opening ceremony, but with a much higher chance of someone getting a concussion later. And then there were the vows. Oh, the knightly vows. These could range from the deeply serious to the wonderfully eccentric. Before a major tournament or a pas d'armes, a passage of arms, where one or more knights would challenge all comers, knights might swear an oath to perform certain feats of valor. A mainstream historical fact is the famous Vow of the Pheasant, made in 1454 at a feast hosted by Philip the Good Duke of Burgundy. Knights swore elaborate oaths, often upon a roasted pheasant, because why not to participate in a crusade? While that was for a crusade, similar grandiloquent vows were made for tournaments. Some vows were quite practical. I swear not to remove my armor until I have broken 3 lances against Sir Hugh. Others could be more theatrical. A knight might vow to fight with one eye covered, or to wear a lady's chemise over his armor, a surprisingly popular one that, or not, to eat meat on certain days until he had accomplished his jousting goals. One quirky tidbit involves a knight named Jean de Boniface, who at a tournament in 1446 vowed to wear an iron fetter on his leg every Tuesday until he had fought an Englishman. Talk about dedication to a grudge, and probably a bit of a limp. These vows were often recorded by the heralds and added another layer of drama and personal narrative to the proceedings. Could Sir Percival, who vowed to joust backwards, not really, but you get the idea, actually pull it off? Tune in after the commercial break, or, after the next trumpet fanfare. All this ceremony, all this display, served multiple purposes. It reinforced the social hierarchy, it provided spectacular entertainment, it allowed for the expression of chivalric ideals, however performative they might sometimes be, and it built a tremendous sense of occasion. The joust itself might only last a few passes, a few minutes of intense action, but the pageantry surrounding it could last for days. It was the medieval equivalent of a Super Bowl week, complete with tailgate parties, albeit with more mead and fewer foam, fingers, celebrity appearances, the knights themselves, and a halftime show that involved actual, potentially bone-jarring conflict. So as you sit there on your horse, waiting for the signal with Lady Gwendolyn's expensive silk ribbon tied somewhat precariously to your helm, you really hope it doesn't get snagged. You're not just a fighter. You're an actor in a grand play, a symbol of an idealized warrior class, and a walking, talking, or at least heavily armored and breathing advertisement for your own magnificence and the social order that put you there. The pounding will come soon enough, but first you must play your part in the polite, performative, and utterly captivating dance of pageantry. The last notes of the trumpets announcing the end of the elaborate parades and the conclusion of the vow-taking ceremonies, Sir Reginald has sworn to only joust while humming a slightly off-key madrigal, much to everyone's amusement or perhaps concern, finally fade away. The crowd, buzzing with anticipation from all the pre-joust finery, settles into a more focused silence, punctuated by the occasional ripple of excited chatter. Your horse shifts beneath you, sensing the change in atmosphere, the same way a stage actor's mount might feel the hush before the curtain rises. The squires have made their final checks on your armor. Your lance feels secure in its rest, and your visor is down, narrowing your world to that horizontal slit of light and the brightly colored tilt barrier stretching before you. It's time for the charge, and time to remember the code. The surprisingly complex set of rules that govern this seemingly straightforward act of trying to knock someone else off their horse with a very long stick. The fundamental unit of jousting is the pass, or course. This is one run, one charge, by two knights from opposite ends of the tilt meeting somewhere, roughly, in the middle. The tilt, that wooden barrier we've mentioned, is key. You might picture it as a long, sturdy fence, often draped with cloth, running down the center of the jousting lane, or lists. Its primary purpose was to prevent direct collisions between the horses, which, as you can imagine, would be catastrophic for everyone involved, especially the horses. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of the tilt barrier was driven more by a desire to protect the incredibly valuable war horses or to protect the knights themselves. Given the cost of a good destrier, it was probably a significant factor for the horses, though knightly well-being was naturally also a consideration. Prior to the common use of the tilt, knights jousted à la plaine or in the open field, relying solely on their horsemanship to avoid a head-on equine disaster. This was, shall we say, a higher stakes version. So you're at one end, your opponent at the other. The marshal of the field, or perhaps a herald, gives the signal, often a shout of laissez aller, let them go, or a trumpet blast. And you go. Your horse, trained for this, explodes into a gallop. It's not just about speed, though. It's about controlled power. You need to maintain your line, keeping the tilt to your left. Your lance couched under your right arm is aimed across your horse's neck, pointing towards your opponent. The skill lies in maintaining this posture, guiding your powerful, thundering steed with your legs and subtle shifts in weight, all while trying to aim a 14-foot pole at a relatively small, moving target, your opponent's shield or ACU. The rules of engagement for this pass were quite specific. The primary target was indeed the shield. Hitting an opponent anywhere else, particularly the head or the horse, was often considered a foul, though rules varied by region and by the specific articles of the tournament. A clean hit on the shield, especially one that broke your lance, was the ideal. This demonstrated good aim, a strong impact and adherence to the spirit of the contest. Remember Sir Reginald and his off-key madrigal. Even he has to aim for the shield, though his humming might put his opponent off more than his lance. The moment of impact is incredibly brief, but unbelievably violent. Imagine the combined speed of 2 war horses, each carrying an armored knight, all that kinetic energy focused on the tiny point of a coronal, or the sharpened tip of a war lance, if it's that kind of joust. The sound alone, a sharp crack, a resonant thud, the splintering of wood, would be deafening up close. The force transmitted through the lance, even a rebaited one, could be immense. This is where your armor, your strength, and your ability to absorb a shock come into play. If you're not braced correctly, if your seat isn't secure, you're going over. And falling off a horse in full plate armor is not like gently dismounting. It's more like a small personal avalanche of metal. A mainstream historical fact is that King Edward III of England was a passionate enthusiast of tournaments and jousting. He even founded the Order of the Garter in 1348, a chivalric order inspired by Arthurian legend, and its companions were expected to be proficient in such knightly pursuits. His patronage significantly boosted the popularity and formalization of jousting in England. He understood that these events were not just sport, but also a powerful tool for fostering loyalty, displaying martial prowess, and projecting an image of a strong, chivalrous court. One of the quirky, less discussed aspects of the charge was the breaking of the gaze. Some manuals or codes of conduct suggested that it was considered unchivalrous to stare intently into your opponent's eyes as you charged. The ideal was a more impersonal focus on the target, the shield. Whether this was a widely followed rule or a bit of aspirational chivalry is debatable, but it speaks to the attempt to frame the joust as a test of skill rather than a personal vendetta. Of course, try telling that to 2 knights who genuinely despise each other and are only being kept apart by a flimsy wooden barrier and the hope of social decorum. I'm not looking at you, Sir Humphrey, I'm just admiring the craftsmanship of your shield, just before I splinter it. The code also dictated what happened after the pass. If both knights remained seated, they would control their horses, turn often to the left, away from the tilt, to avoid collision during the turn, and return to their starting positions to receive fresh lances from their squires if theirs had broken or been lost. This controlled return was as much a part of the display of horsemanship as the charge itself. A knight who couldn't manage his horse elegantly after the impact lost a bit of face even if he'd scored a good hit. The number of passes in a single jousting encounter would be predetermined, often 3, but sometimes more, especially if the contest was close or if specific challenges had been issued. If a lance was dropped, or if a knight lost a piece of armor that wasn't a result of a direct fair hit, these could also have rule implications, sometimes penalizing the knight or requiring a temporary halt. The core idea was a controlled, ritualized combat. You're demonstrating your ability to manage your horse at speed, your accuracy with the lance, your strength in delivering a blow, and your resilience in receiving one. All of this happens within a framework designed to maximize the spectacle while theoretically minimizing the fatalities. It's a strange dance of aggression and restraint, a microcosm of the chivalric ideal itself. The warrior tamed by rules and etiquette, his ferocity channeled into a display of skill. As you complete your first pass, perhaps your lance shatters satisfyingly against your opponent's shield. You feel the jolt, but you remain firmly in the saddle. You can almost hear the crowd's roar muffled through your helm, and you prepare to do it all over again, because that's the charge and that's the code. The dust from your first pass settles, or perhaps it's the faint scent of Sir Reginald's slightly singed madrigal still hanging in the air if he got a bit too enthusiastic with his humming and forgot to breathe. You've both charged lances have met shields, or perhaps in a less ideal scenario, one of you has unexpectedly inspected the texture of the tournament ground up close, and now comes the crucial part: who gets the bragging rights. Or more formally, how are points awarded in this elaborate game of polite pummeling? It wasn't just about who stayed on their horse, though. That was certainly a significant factor. The scoring systems in medieval jousting could be surprisingly intricate, reflecting the value placed on different types of successful hits and unhorsings. It was a far cry from simply shouting, "I hit him harder." As you and your opponent return to your respective ends of the lists, all eyes turn to the judges and the heralds. These officials often experience former knights or men deeply learned in the rules of chivalry and heraldry had the crucial task of observing each pass and awarding points according to the agreed-upon articles of the tournament. These articles, essentially the rule book for that specific event, would be proclaimed beforehand, so every competitor knew what constituted a scoring hit and how many points it was worth. You can imagine the squires on either side anxiously awaiting the verdict, perhaps already mentally tallying the score. The most basic and universally recognized way to score was by breaking your lance cleanly on your opponent's shield, specifically within a designated target area, often the upper part of the shield. A well-aimed lance that shattered dramatically, that satisfying explosion of wood we talked about, was usually worth 1 point. If your lance struck the shield but didn't break it, might score nothing, or perhaps a lesser fraction of a point, depending on the local rules. The emphasis on breaking the lance was because it indicated a solid, forceful, and well-aimed blow. A mere glancing hit, or one that skittered off, wasn't nearly as impressive. Remember those lances designed to be frangible or even filled with colored powder. That was all in service of making these breaks clear and spectacular. Oh, a lovely puff of blue from Sir Geoffrey's lance. That's a point for Gryffindor, for Sir Geoffrey. Now where you hit on the shield could also matter. Striking the very center of the shield, the umbo or boss, might be worth more than hitting the edge. Hitting the opponent's helmet, the haume or helm, was often a higher scoring hit, perhaps worth 2 or even 3 points because it was a more difficult and dangerous target. However, this also carried a higher risk. A blow to the helm could be very disorienting, potentially unseating the knight, or in less regulated times, or with sharper lances causing serious injury. So while it scored well, it was a riskier shot to attempt. Historians still argue whether the increased points for headshots incentivized more dangerous play or simply rewarded greater accuracy under pressure. Then there was the ultimate score, unhorsing your opponent. Sending the other knight tumbling from his saddle was the medieval jousting equivalent of a grand slam or a knockout. This was usually worth the most points, often decisively ending that particular set of passes or even the entire match. If you unhorsed your opponent, it didn't just mean you hit him hard. It meant you hit him with such precision and force that you overcame his balance, his strength, and his connection with his mount. It was a definitive display of superiority. However, even here, there were nuances. If a knight fell from his horse not because of a direct hit, but because his horse tumbled, or he simply lost his balance, perhaps while trying to avoid Sir Reginald's aggressive humming, it might not count as an unhorsing for scoring purposes, or it might be viewed differently. It had to be a direct result of the opponent's lance. A mainstream historical fact is that scoring systems became increasingly codified over time. Early tournaments might have been more subjective, but by the 15th and 16th centuries, detailed scoring charts were common. For example, the famous tournament book of King René of Anjou, written in the mid-15th century, provides elaborate descriptions of rules and scoring, indicating a highly developed system. These weren't just casual guidelines. They were serious business. What about breaking multiple lances in a single pass? This was rare. But if, for example, your lance broke and your opponent also broke his lance on you, both of you might score. Or if the rules were particularly specific, the knight who broke his lance better, perhaps higher on the shield or with more force, as judged by the sound or the opponent's reaction, might get the edge. The heralds needed sharp eyes and even sharper judgment. One quirky tidbit related to scoring involved attending the lance. This meant that if your lance struck, broke, and a significant portion of it remained embedded in the opponent's shield or armor, that might be worth an extra point or be considered a particularly meritorious hit. It was a visual confirmation of a deep, solid impact. You can imagine a knight riding back with a good 2 feet of his opponent's lance sticking out of his shield like a bizarre wooden porcupine, a clear, if slightly inconvenient trophy of the pass. Well, Sir Marmaduke clearly made his point and left some of it behind. Points could also be deducted for fouls, which we'll delve into more in the next section, but it's important to note here that a scoring hit could be negated if it was accompanied by an illegal move. So if you struck your opponent's helm for 3 points, but also simultaneously hit his horse, a major no-no, you might find your brilliant headshot disqualified. The polite part of polite pommeling meant adhering to these restrictions. Sometimes prizes were awarded not just for the highest overall score, but for specific achievements. The knight who broke the most lances the knight who achieved the finest unhorsing, or even the knight judged to have comported himself with the greatest chivalry and skill throughout the day, regardless of his final point tally. This allowed for multiple winners and recognized different aspects of knightly prowess. So as you wait for the herald's call after your pass, you're mentally replaying the impact. Did your lance hit? True. Did it break? cleanly. Was it high enough on the shield? Did your opponent wobble? The tension is palpable. Then the call comes, a point to the Sieur de la Chevauchée. Fantastique for a lance well broken. Or perhaps no points awarded this pass, lances struck too low. Every call was a small drama building towards the final result of the agreed-upon number of courses. It was a system designed to reward precision power and adherence to the rules, turning a potentially brutal clash into a quantifiable contest of skill. And if you were Sir Reginald, you just hoped you got points for artistic impression with your madrigal, because your lance work might need some help. The thrill of hearing the herald announce points in your favor is still buzzing through your veins, or perhaps you're nursing a bruised ego and shoulder after your opponent scored decisively. But jousting wasn't just about accumulating points for successful thwacks and dramatic shatters of wood. It was equally about what you didn't do. The line between a celebrated champion and a dishonorable lout could be as thin as the edge of a coronal, and crossing that line brought penalty, shame, and the distinct possibility of facing some very unhappy tournament officials, or worse, an actual duel to settle matters of offended honor. Let's delve into the world of fouls and face plans, forbidding those actions that could turn your quest for glory into a quick lesson in medieval disapproval. One of the most consistently forbidden actions across almost all jousting codes was striking your opponent's horse. Your magnificent warhorse, remember, was not just a mode of transportation. It was a highly trained, incredibly valuable partner in this endeavor, and often a beloved companion. Deliberately targeting a horse was seen as unchivalrous, unsporting, and frankly a bit like kicking a puppy in the world of knightly ethics. Just not done. If you lamed or injured your opponent's horse, you could face disqualification from the entire tournament, hefty fines, horses were expensive, and significant dishonor. Accidental hits sometimes happened given the chaos of two large animals charging at each other, but even then, apologies and perhaps compensation were expected. Historians still argue whether the strict prohibition on hitting horses was primarily due to the economic value of the animals or a genuine tenet of early animal welfare within the knightly class. It was probably a mixture. No one wanted to lose a prized destrier, but the ideal of the noble warrior also recoiled from such a tactic. Another major foul was striking a knight when he was unprepared or otherwise vulnerable outside the formal pass. For instance, hitting an opponent whose helm was not properly secured, whose visor was up, or who had lost his lance and was not yet rearmed, was a serious breach of conduct. The joust was supposed to be a fair contest between two equally prepared combatants. Attacking someone at a disadvantage was the medieval equivalent of a cheap shot, and it would earn you nothing but scorn. This is where the role of the marshals and heralds was crucial, as they would signal the readiness of both knights before each pass. Ignoring these signals was a grave offense. Imagine the scene. Sir Cuthbert is adjusting his slightly askew helmet, and suddenly, bam, Sir Reginald, mid-madrigal, takes a potshot. The crowd would erupt in boos, and Reginald would likely be escorted from the lists, possibly with a few choice medieval insults hurled his way. Then there was the issue of illegal equipment. While we discussed the difference between lances of war and lances of peace, using a sharpened war lance in a joust à plaisance without explicit prior agreement from your opponent and the tournament organizers was a massive foul. It would be like showing up to a friendly fencing match with a broadsword, similarly tampering with your lance in forbidden ways, perhaps by illegally weighting it or using unapproved materials to make it less likely to break, thus transferring more brutal force, could lead to disqualification if discovered. Armor, too, had its regulations. While knights prided themselves on their custom protection, certain modifications deemed to give an unfair advantage or to be excessively dangerous might be disallowed. Striking below the belt, or more accurately below the shield, in a way that seemed intended to injure the rider in an unarmored or less protected area, or to deliberately unseat him by tripping his horse, though difficult with a lance, could also be considered foul play. The target was the shield, or sometimes the helm, as we've discussed. Wild, uncontrolled swings or thrusts that endangered other parts of the body or seemed to show a lack of skill and control were frowned upon. The ideal was a precise, controlled impact. It's a bit like the difference between a skilled surgeon and a butcher. Both use sharp instruments, but the intent and precision are worlds apart. One famous medieval text, the Livre des Tournois by King René of Anjou, meticulously outlines such rules, demonstrating the seriousness with which these distinctions were made. What happened if you did commit a foul? The penalties varied. For minor infractions, it might be a deduction of points or a warning from the marshals. For more serious fouls, such as deliberately striking a horse or using a forbidden weapon, the penalties could be severe, immediate disqualification from the joust, forfeiture of any prizes already won, and public dishonor. In some cases, a knight found guilty of particularly egregious behavior might even have his spurs hacked off or his shield displayed upside down. Potent symbols of disgrace in the chivalric world. One quirky tidbit is that sometimes if a knight was judged to have behaved in a cowardly or unchivalrous manner, the ladies present at the tournament might collectively decide on a penance for him, which could range from public admonishment to being awarded a mock prize like a dull spur to signify his lack of valor. The social pressure was immense. The faceplant's forbidden part is a bit tongue-in-cheek, as unhorsings were of course a key part of the sport. However, how you unhorsed someone and what happened afterwards could also fall under scrutiny. If you unhorsed an opponent and then, say, taunted him excessively or refused to help him if he was clearly injured and entangled in his armor, that could be seen as unknightly. The ideal was to be a gracious winner. After all, you might be the one inspecting the dirt next time. The articles of a tournament often included clauses about behavior both on and off the field. A knight was expected to maintain a certain decorum throughout the event. Excessive drunkenness, brawling outside the lists, or insulting heralds or ladies could all lead to sanctions. The entire tournament was a performance of chivalry, and breaking character so spectacularly was not appreciated. Ultimately, these rules about fouls and forbidden actions were designed to keep the joust within the bounds of a relatively safe and honorable sport, rather than letting it degenerate into a bloody free-for-all. They reinforced the idea that true knightly prowess was about skill control and adherence to a code, not just brute force. So as you guide your horse back to your end of the tilt, you're not just thinking about your next aim. You're also acutely aware of the invisible lines of conduct, the polite yet firm boundaries that separate a celebrated jouster from a disgraced one. Avoid the foul's aim true and try not to end up as the star of an unscheduled night meets ground comedy sketch unless it's a perfectly legitimate point-scoring, lance-shattering, crowd-roaring kind of faceplant. So you've charged your lance, has either connected beautifully or gone embarrassingly astray. Perhaps Sir Reginald's off-key madrigal was more distracting than you anticipated. Points have been or not been awarded, and hopefully no horses were inadvertently poked in a manner that would cause social ostracization. But who is making these calls? Who decides if that lance break was truly magnificent, or if Sir Cuthbert's slight wobble was in fact a near unhorsing worthy of an extra point? This crucial, often thankless task fell to a group of individuals as integral to the tournament as the knights themselves, the heralds. They were far more than just fancy announcers. They were the referees, the rule keepers, the historians, and sometimes even the diplomats of the jousting world. Imagine these figures often clad in brightly colored tabards, emblazoned with the coats of arms of their lord, or perhaps even a generic tournament official design if they were serving a collective body. They needed to be instantly recognizable, their authority clear amidst the chaos and clamor of the lists. You'd see them positioned strategically around the jousting arena, their eyes peeled, missing nothing. They were the medieval equivalent of a line judge, a referee, and a video assistant referee, VAR, all rolled into one, but without the benefit of slow motion replay. Just incredibly sharp eyes and an encyclopedic knowledge of precedent. One of their primary functions, as we've touched upon, was to scrutinize each pass and assist the chief judges or the marshal of the field in scoring. This wasn't just a casual glance. They were looking for the specifics. Where did the lance strike? Did it break cleanly? How many pieces did it break into? Yes, sometimes even that level of detail was noted. Was the hit on the shield, the helm, or heaven forbid the horse? They needed to be impartial even if their own lord was competing. The integrity of the tournament depended on their fairness. A mainstream historical fact is that heralds by the later Middle Ages had formed their own professional organizations like the College of Arms, in England founded in 1484 by King Richard III, which standardized their duties, training, and authority. This professionalization underscored their importance, not just in tournaments, but in all matters of lineage ceremony and even diplomacy. Before the jousting even began, heralds were busy. Remember the display of helms we talked about. Heralds would be there, examining the crests and shields, ensuring that each competitor was genuinely of noble birth and entitled to bear the arms they displayed. They were the guardians of heraldic correctness. You couldn't just invent a cool-looking dragon for your shield if your family crest was, say, 3 rather unassuming turnips. The heralds would know. They kept meticulous records known as rolls of arms, which were illustrated manuscripts cataloging coats of arms. This knowledge was vital for identifying knights on the field, especially when they were fully encased in armor, recognizable only by their heraldic devices. Ah, the charging griffin on a field of azure, that must be Sir Geoffrey, and the 3 turnips. Well, that's undoubtedly Sir Humphrey of Humble Mumble. Say, during the joust itself, their voices were often the ones the crowd listened for. While the marshal might give the signal to charge, it was often a herald who would announce the results of each pass, proclaiming the points awarded in a loud, clear voice that carried over the murmur of the spectators. A valiant stroke by the Knight of the Swan. 1 point for a lance well and truly broken upon the helm. They also had the unenviable task of announcing fouls. Imagine having to publicly call out a powerful and potentially short-tempered baron for illegally thwacking his opponent's steed. It required courage and a firm belief in the rules. A quirky or fringe tidbit about heralds is their role in crying largesse. After a particularly spectacular feat of arms or at the end of a successful tournament, victorious knights were often expected to be generous. Heralds would cry, largesse, largesse. Generosity, encouraging the knight and the noble spectators to distribute money or gifts. The heralds themselves often benefited from this largesse, which formed a part of their income. So, they had a vested interest in hyping up the good performances. It was good for their own pockets. A most magnificent unhorsing, surely such prowess is worthy of considerable largesse, my lords and ladies. Historians still argue whether heralds were primarily impartial arbiters of the rules, or if their judgments could be subtly swayed by the political landscape of the tournament, especially when powerful nobles were involved. While the ideal was absolute impartiality, human nature and the complex web of feudal allegiances likely meant that heralds sometimes had to tread a very careful diplomatic line. Their position often depended on the patronage of the very nobles whose contests they were judging. It was a delicate balancing act between upholding the strict letter of the chivalric law and maintaining good relations with the powerful. Beyond the immediate judging, heralds also served as official record keepers of the tournament. They would note the names of the participants, the challenges issued, the results of the jousts, the prizes awarded, and any notable deeds of arms. These records, sometimes beautifully illuminated, became part of the history of chivalry, preserving the reputations of great jousters for posterity. They were, in essence, the sports journalists of their day, but with more tabards and less Wi-Fi. Furthermore, if disputes arose, and in a highly competitive environment involving armed nobles, disputes were almost inevitable, heralds often acted as mediators. Their knowledge of precedent and the intricacies of the code of honor made them valuable in resolving disagreements that might otherwise escalate. They could interpret the rules, cite past examples, and help find a resolution that ideally satisfied both parties and upheld the honor of the tournament. So as you watch the heralds confer after a particularly contentious pass, their colorful figures, a small island of deliberation in the sea of armored knights and eager spectators, you realize their burden. They are the living embodiment of the rules, the memory of the sport, and the arbiters of its fleeting glories. Without their sharp eyes, their loud voices, and their deep knowledge, the surprisingly polite art of knightly face-planting would have been a great deal less polite and probably a lot more chaotic. They ensured that the pounding had a purpose and that the pageantry was properly punctuated by points. The echoes of the herald's cries, proclaiming points for well-broken lances, or perhaps the occasional regrettable foul, fade into the tapestry of memory. We've examined the rules, the armor, the horses, and the pageantry. Now let's populate these meticulously prepared lists with some of the actual flesh and blood and steel-encased individuals who made jousting the legendary spectacle it became. These were the superstars of their day, the knights whose names were spoken with awe, whose deeds were recounted in chronicles and sung by minstrels, and whose skill in the saddle and with the lance set the standard for others to aspire to. We're diving into the realm of legends of the lists, those famous jousters and historically significant tournaments that have left an indelible mark on our understanding of this martial sport. One cannot discuss legendary jousters without mentioning William Marshall, 1st Earl of Pembroke. Active in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, he is often described as the greatest knight that ever lived. While much of his fame comes from his prowess in actual battle and his unwavering loyalty through the reigns of 5 English kings, he was also a renowned tournament champion in his youth. This was during the era of the more chaotic melees, before the single tilt barrier became standard. Chronicles tell of him capturing numerous knights for ransom, his skill and endurance making him a dominant force on the tournament circuit of France and Flanders. A mainstream historical fact is that William Marshall's lengthy career and well-documented life provide invaluable insights into the nature of knighthood and tournaments during his time. His biography, L'Histoire de Guillaume le Maréchal, commissioned by his son, is a rich source for understanding the blend of martial skill, political maneuvering, and personal honor that defined a great knight. Fast forward a couple of centuries, and you encounter figures like Jean de Coux-Lemengre, also known as Boucicaut, a marshal of France in the late 14th and early 15th centuries. Boucicaut was famed not only for his military exploits, but also for his dedication to the chivalric ideal and his extraordinary jousting abilities. He co-founded the Emprise de l'Escou Vert à la Dame Blanche, enterprise of the Green Shield, with the White Lady, a chivalric order whose members vowed to defend the honor of ladies and to participate in jousts and tournaments. Boucicaut himself famously undertook a pas d'armée at Saint-Inglevert near Calais, where he and 2 other French knights challenged all comers for 30 days. They reportedly jousted against scores of English knights and esquires, with Boucicaut himself breaking numerous lances and acquitting himself with great distinction. He was the epitome of the knight-errant, always ready for a challenge. Then there's Jacques de Lalaing, a Burgundian knight of the mid-15th century whose feats in the lists became legendary. He was celebrated for his almost obsessive pursuit of jousting glory, traveling widely to seek out worthy opponents. Chronicles depict him as virtually unbeatable, performing incredible feats of arms in tournaments across Europe. One quirky tidbit about Jacques de Lalaing is that he supposedly fought a pas d'armes, where he defended a passage against all challengers for a full year, though such accounts often blur the line between historical fact and chivalric romance. He was so dedicated that even when grievously wounded in one eye by a splinter during a joust, a chilling foreshadowing of King Henry II's fate, he reportedly wanted to continue. His career, though brilliant, was also a reminder of the ever-present dangers. These individual legends often shone brightest at specific historically significant tournaments. These weren't just local sporting events. They were major international gatherings attracting knights from across Christendom. The Pas d'Armes de la Joyeuse Garde, Passage of Arms of Joyous Garde, held by René of Anjou in Saumur in 1446, was one such event renowned for its elaborate Arthurian themes and the sheer scale of the festivities surrounding the jousts. René himself, a great patron of chivalry, meticulously planned these events, and his tournament book, as mentioned earlier, details the ideal conduct and rules for such an occasion. Another notable type of jousting encounter that created legends was the deed of arms for love, or a challenge issued in the name of a lady. A knight might declare his lady the most beautiful or virtuous in the world and offer to defend that claim with his lance against any who dared dispute it. This added a powerful romantic and personal element to the contest. While perhaps not a single famous tournament, these individual challenges, often recorded in chronicles, contributed to the mystic of jousting and the reputations of the knights involved. Sir Tristan offers to break 3 lances with any knight who denies that Lady Isolde's new hat is the pinnacle of medieval fashion. Okay, maybe not the hat, but you get the idea. Historians still argue whether the almost superhuman feats attributed to some of these legendary jousters are accurate historical accounts, or if they were embellished over time by chroniclers eager to promote a particular knight family or chivalric ideal. It's likely a bit of both. The desire for heroes and the romanticism surrounding knighthood undoubtedly led to some exaggeration. However, the consistency of accounts regarding certain individuals and their documented participation in major events suggests a very real, very high level of skill and courage. Consider also the tournaments held to celebrate major occasions, royal weddings, coronations, or peace treaties. These were often exceptionally lavish. For example, the Field of the Cloth of Gold in 1520, a meeting between King Henry VIII of England and King Francis III of France, featured spectacular jousting and tournaments as part of the diplomatic and competitive display of magnificence between the two kingdoms. Both kings, young and athletic at the time, personally participated, eager to showcase their own knightly prowess. Henry VIII, in his younger days, was a keen and accomplished jouster, though a serious jousting accident in 1536 is thought to have had long-term health consequences for him, perhaps contributing to his later obesity and ill temper. One could say his enthusiasm for polite face-planting eventually caught up with him. These legends and grand tournaments served to cement jousting not just as a sport, but as a central pillar of noble culture. The stories of William Marshal Boucicaut and Jacques de Lalaing, whether wholly factual or partly mythologized, provided the role models. The grand tournaments provided the stage. They demonstrated that skill in arms, when combined with adherence to the chivalric code, was the path to earthly glory and enduring fame. As you imagine yourself in the stands watching these celebrated figures thunder down the lists, their banners streaming, their lances perfectly aimed, you can feel the power of their legend, a legend built, one shattering lance, one unhorsed opponent, and one roar of the crowd at a time. The thundering hooves of legendary jousters like William Marshal and Jacques de Lalaing, which once seemed to shake the very foundations of chivalric society, eventually began to quiet. The vibrant banners that flew over bustling tournament grounds started to look a little faded, a little anachronistic. Like all golden ages, the high noon of jousting couldn't last forever. A confluence of factors, technological, military, social, and even accidental, conspired to bring about the twilight of the tilt, leading to the gradual decline of this once paramount knightly pastime. It wasn't a sudden death, more of a slow fade, like the setting sun over a deserted list field. One of the most significant factors was the changing face of warfare itself. Jousting at its core was born from cavalry training. The knight on his destrier lance, couched, was the medieval equivalent of a main battle tank. However, the rise of disciplined infantry formations, particularly those armed with longbows and later firearms, began to challenge the dominance of the mounted knight on the battlefield. The battles of Crécy, 1346, and Agincourt of 1415, where English longbowmen decimated French chivalry, were stark indicators that the era of cavalry supremacy was waning. If the skills honed in the joust were becoming less relevant in actual war, then one of the primary justifications for the expense and danger of tournaments began to erode. Why spend a fortune on armor and war horses and risk your neck in the lists if on the battlefield a well-aimed arrow from a commoner could undo all your knightly training? Then there was the advent of gunpowder and firearms. A bullet, as it turned out, had little respect for even the finest Milanese plate armor. As cannons, reshaped siege warfare, and handguns began to appear on the battlefield, the image of the lance-wielding knight started to seem quaint. Plate armor itself became incredibly heavy and specialized to try and offer protection against these new threats, but this often made it even more cumbersome for the kind of agile horsemanship jousting celebrated. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of firearms on the knightly class was as significant as their actual battlefield effectiveness in the early stages, but the trend was undeniable. The future of warfare was looking less like a one-on-one clash of steel and more like a noisy, smoky, and far less personal affair. The expense of jousting also played a role. We've touched on this before. The armor, the horses, the lances, the retinue, the travel. It was an incredibly costly pursuit, largely the domain of the wealthy nobility. As economic structures shifted and new pathways to power and influence emerged through trade law or royal administration, the singular focus on martial prowess as the hallmark of nobility began to broaden. Some nobles found that investing their time and resources elsewhere might yield better returns than chasing glory in the lists. This isn't to say they abandoned martial pursuits entirely, but the all-consuming passion for the tournament may have cooled for some. The very nature of jousting also started to change. In its later phases, it became increasingly ritualized and in some ways safer, or at least the intent was to make it safer with more specialized sporting armor and even more rule-bound encounters. While this might have reduced casualties, some argue it also diluted the raw thrill and perceived martial relevance that had fueled its earlier popularity. It became more of a sport in the modern sense and less of a direct preparation for war. This evolution, ironically, might have made it less appealing to those who still saw it primarily as a martial art. A mainstream historical fact often cited in the decline of jousting is the death of King Henry II of France in 1559. As we noted earlier, he was mortally wounded when a splinter from the lance of his opponent, Gabriel Montgomery, pierced his eye during a joust celebrating a peace treaty. The king's agonizing death over several days sent a shock wave through the royal courts of Europe. If even a king with the best equipment and presumably well-managed conditions could die in such a manner, it gave many other high-ranking nobles pause. Monarchs became more reluctant to participate themselves, and perhaps less enthusiastic about encouraging their leading courtiers to do so. It was a very public relations disaster for the sport. Imagine the headlines: Royal face plant proves fatal jousting cancelled. Furthermore, the cultural winds were shifting. The Renaissance brought with it a renewed interest in classical learning arts and different forms of courtly accomplishment. While the chivalric ideal didn't vanish overnight, it was joined and in some circles supplanted by ideals of the Renaissance man, accomplished in letters, arts, and diplomacy, as well as arms. The singular focus on martial glory began to seem a little one-dimensional to some. Courtly life diversified, and jousting became one entertainment among many rather than the undisputed main event. A quirky, lesser-known factor that might have contributed, albeit in a small way, was the changing fashion in armor. As armor became more stylized and ornate for parades and courtly display, it sometimes became less practical for actual jousting. The Maximilian-style armor of the early 16th century, with its fluting and decorative elements, was beautiful, but some of its more extreme forms were perhaps better suited for showing off at a banquet than for taking a lance impact. When the equipment becomes more about fashion than function, it's often a sign that the core purpose is fading. Of course, jousting didn't disappear completely. It lingered on in various forms, sometimes as historical reenactment, sometimes as a highly stylized courtly pageant with little real danger. But its heyday, its central role in noble life and warfare, was undeniably over by the end of the 16th century or early 17th century in most parts of Europe. The thundering charge gave way to the precise drills of the musketeer, and the clang of lance on shield was replaced by the roar of cannon. The polite art of knightly face-planting, for all its glory and intricate rules, was slowly but surely riding into the sunset, leaving behind a legacy of chivalric ideals, romantic legends, and a lot of very expensive, slightly dented historical artifacts. And so the sun finally dips below the horizon of the list field, casting long, melancholic shadows, where once the bright banners of eager knights had snapped so crisply in the afternoon breeze. The last echoes of shattered lances and the roar of the appreciative or perhaps disappointed crowd have long since faded into the quiet hum of history. The twilight of the tilt, brought on by gunpowder, changing warfare, and perhaps even the occasional, tragically well-aimed splinter, has settled into a deeper night. But even as the practice of jousting itself receded from the forefront of martial and courtly life, its legacy, the surprisingly polite and enduring art of knightly face-planting, continued to resonate, leaving an indelible imprint on our culture, our language, and our romantic imagination. The most immediate and tangible legacy, of course, lies in the vast troves of armor weapons and art that jousting inspired. Museums around the world are filled with these magnificent steel shells, testaments to the incredible skill of medieval armorers. Each intricately fluted breastplate, each specialized jousting helm, with its narrow eye slits and reinforced brow, tells a story of a time when personal combat was both a deadly reality and a highly refined art form. The lances, the horse armor, the heraldic tabards, they are not just artifacts. They are portals back to that era of structured violence and elaborate display. You can almost hear the creak of leather and the clank of metal when you stand before them. Beyond the physical objects, jousting has profoundly influenced our language. Think of phrases like breaking a lance for someone meaning to argue or contend in their defense, or full tilt, describing something done with maximum speed and energy. The very word freelance, now referring to an independent worker, originally described a mercenary knight, a freelance, not sworn to a particular lord, available for hire, perhaps even for a tournament if the price was right. These linguistic fossils are reminders of how deeply ingrained the imagery and concepts of jousting were in the medieval and Renaissance psyche. He really went at that project full tilt, didn't he? You might say, unwittingly channeling the energy of a knight thundering down the lists. The ideals of chivalry, so closely intertwined with the tournament culture, have also had a long and complex afterlife. While the full-blown code of conduct, with its specific rules about horse thwacking and vow-making, might seem distant, the broader concepts of honor, fair play, protecting the vulnerable, and courtesy, the polite part of the polite pummeling, have continued to be held up as aspirational, even if often imperfectly realized. The romanticized image of the knight in shining armor, defending justice and wooing fair maidens, often after a successful joust, became a powerful trope in literature and art, from Arthurian legends, which themselves enjoyed a massive resurgence and codification during the age of chivalry, right through to modern fantasy novels and films. Historians still argue whether the chivalric code was a genuine moral compass for the knightly class or more of a sophisticated public relations exercise to legitimize their often brutal power. Perhaps, as with most things, it was a complicated mix of both. The spectacle of the joust, its inherent drama and visual splendor, has ensured its place in popular imagination. Even now, centuries later, medieval fairs and reenactments often feature jousting as a centerpiece, drawing crowds eager for a taste of that bygone era. It's a testament to the enduring appeal of the sight of armored knights on horseback, the flash of steel, and the satisfying if simulated crack of a lance. It's a spectacle that taps into something primal about competition and skill wrapped in a layer of historical romance. The UFC has nothing on a well-run pajamas for sheer unadulterated pageantry. One quirky tidbit regarding its legacy is how jousting terminology occasionally pops up in unexpected places. Think of tilting at windmills from Cervantes' Don Quixote. While Don Quixote's jousts were a product of his delusion, the imagery itself, the lone figure with a lance charging an imagined foe, draws directly from the visual vocabulary of jousting, even as it satirizes the outdated chivalric ideals. It shows how pervasive that imagery had become a shared cultural reference point. A mainstream historical fact influencing its legacy is that the decline of practical jousting didn't mean an end to knightly games. Equestrian skills continued to be prized, evolving into disciplines like dressage and other forms of competitive riding. The tournament transformed into carousels and historical pageants in the 17th and 18th centuries, which were more about elaborate choreography and horsemanship displays than actual combat simulation. The spirit of competitive display and equine partnership found new outlets. So as you settle back, now letting the images of gleaming armor and thundering hooves begin to soften at the edges of your mind, consider the journey we've taken. From the chaotic melees born of military necessity through the meticulous crafting of rules for polite engagement, the specialized development of armor and lances, the elaborate pageantry, the nail-biting tension of the charge, the complex scoring the shame of fouls, the crucial role of the heralds, and the celebration of legendary champions. We've seen how medieval jousting was so much more than just two knights trying to knock each other over. It was a surprisingly intricate dance of danger and decorum, a sport, an art form, a social ritual, and a powerful symbol of a bygone age. Its echoes linger, a testament to humanity's enduring fascination with skill, courage, and the dramatic, if occasionally face-planting, pursuit of glory. The lists are quiet now, the dust has settled, and the polite art of knightly face-planting has ridden into history, leaving us with its rich and surprisingly gentle legacy. The world of medieval jousting, with its gleaming armor and thundering hooves, its elaborate rules for what was essentially a very stylish and ritualized form of face planting now begins to recede like the tide gently pulling away from the shore. The clamor of the crowd softens the bright colors of the banners, and surcoats start to blend into the twilight hues of approaching slumber. Feel the weight of that heavy helm begin to lift, the constriction of the breastplate ease, as you allow yourself to drift away from the lists, away from the expectation and the adrenaline of the charge. The scent of horse and hay, of polished steel and splintered wood fades into the familiar comfort of your own quiet space. The heralds have made their final calls, the points have all been tallied, and the champions, both victorious and gracefully unhorsed, have retired from the field. What remains is the gentle echo of a time when honor was pursued with a 14-foot pole, and politeness was a surprisingly important component of trying to knock your opponent into next week. Let these images soften, now becoming less distinct, more dreamlike. There are no more lances to couch, no more intricate rules of engagement to memorize. There is only the quiet, the calm, and the gentle descent into a peaceful, well-deserved rest. The polite art of nightly face-planting has served its purpose for tonight, guiding you towards the soft embrace of sleep.